Welcome everybody to another episode of the Daniel Teaches Experience. Folks, I'm super excited to be here today. I've got a very special guest on. I'm here with my friend and former teacher, Kelli Kraft. Madam Kelli Kraft, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Absolutely sensational. Now, folks, just a little bit of backstory. The way that I met, as I would call her, Madam Kraft back in the day, was like this. I hope you don't mind me sharing this.
No, please.
So folks, I don't know if you can think about your last French class, right? I'm going to be completely honest. When I think about French class or the French instructor, I always think about old, not fun, and not friendly. So when I met Madame Kraft and I saw young, fun, and friendly, I was like, this is incredible. This is amazing. This is life-changing. I've been wrong all my life. Next thing you know, we've been like this, and we've held in contact, and things are good. And anyways, Madame Kraft, or Kelli, as I call her now, put something on her Instagram about it was something to do with gender and being aware and educating people. And I'm a person who loves to get educated on things that I don't fully understand. So I said, this is perfect. I said, I can reach out to Kelli, ask her to come on the podcast, and we can really talk about this idea of gender in a sense that, because people hear my voice and they hear my perspective all the time. So it could be really refreshing and interesting to hear someone else's perspective and someone else's voice who's lived different experiences. And I think it can be really educational all around. So Kelli was gracious enough to come on the podcast and to talk about gender. Kelli, is there anything that I missed in that intro?
No, I think that's good. I love the praise. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. You are very welcome. So gender is there's a lot of different ways that we can go on about this. I think for the basis of this discussion, it's really important to first begin with a distinction. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kelli, but you would agree with the statement that sex and gender are different things. They're not the same thing.
Yeah. And that's something that a lot of people struggle with because we have, a certain idea of what bodies are like or what sex and gender are like based on high school biology. And that's kind of where a lot of people come from in terms of their understanding. But in the past, 10, 20, 30 years, there's been a lot of changes in the way that we understand how bodies work and how brains work in conjunction with our bodies. So we have a lot more of a nuanced understanding of sex versus gender now.
Excellent. Now, Kelli, if someone's listening to this, right, and let's say they don't quite understand what the difference is, if you were going to explain to someone just in very simple terms, this is what makes gender gender, and this is what makes sex sex, this is how they're distinct, how would you explain that to someone?
That's a really good question. And I often address that because I have been the GSA sponsor at all of the schools that I've taught at, the Gender and Sexuality Alliance. And I've been the SOGI lead at the schools that I've worked at. So the Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity. So the school districts in BC have now adopted a policy that makes it so that schools must have an affirming and safe space. They have to have policies, curriculum, and environments that are safe and welcoming for all of our diverse students. So I often get asked questions like this because it's really new for a lot of teachers, but also new for students. So when I think of the difference between sex and gender, sex is to do with the hormones, the chromosomes, and the body parts that you have. But a lot of people think that it's male, you have a penis and testes, and female, you have a vagina and ovaries. But there are nuances within that. Even there's intersex, there's XY instead of there's XY and XX, but there's also Fragile X syndrome. And there's all of these different versions between the two binaries that we think of that people forget about or intentionally ignore. So sex is the genetic makeup of your body and the way that it manifests both in your reproductive organs and also in your secondary sex characteristics. So whether you have facial hair, where your body fat is distributed, etc. And then gender is more how you, I want to talk about two different kinds. There's gender identity. So that's how you feel about your gender, how you feel about the way that you walk through the world. And there's gender expression. So it's the way that you present yourself to other people. So when I think of my gender, to give you a concrete example, people see me and I often look feminine. I have longer hair. I often wear makeup. So my gender presentation or my gender expression is often feminine. But there are other days where my gender presentation or my gender expression is more masculine. For example, right now I'm wearing some really great tie-dye sweat shorts and a t-shirt, and I was wearing sneakers. So it's a little more masculine. So for me, when I think about my presentation, it kind of changes from day to day. A lot of people are really set in their gender presentation, always masculine or always feminine. And some people kind of switch between them, or some people are more androgynous. So kind of neither male or neither masculine nor feminine. So yeah, gender is more the way that you express yourself and the way that you feel in your body, whereas sex is more the biological imperatives within your body to reproduce, or the way that your physical characteristics manifest. Was that too technical?
No,
Or did that work?
No. That made perfect sense. So sex,
Okay.
you're saying, is more the biological aspect, like you're born with certain sexual organs.
Mm-hmm.
And then social is, and I really liked how you put it into a branch. So this is something I hadn't thought about directly. So there's gender identity and gender expression.
Mm-hmm.
And you could argue one is more internal, how you feel, and one is how you present yourself externally.
Yes.
Am I perfect? Now, a question I have for you, Kelly, is, so if, let's say your gender expression could change, so maybe you can dress more masculine one day and then more feminine the other day, would your gender identity stay the same, or would your gender identity, like...
That is such a good question.
Okay, so you get what I mean, right?
Yes, I totally get what you mean. And I think that it really depends on the person. And because we've kind of grown up in the society that assumes that gender is binary, you are either male and masculine or you're female and feminine, we assume that we're always going to be the same. But when I think back to when I was in like 5th grade, I was this like nerdy little tomboy, and I wore backwards hats and like tearaway Nike shorts and stuff, like my gender expression has changed a lot since I was a kid, and it's changed a lot in the last 5 years. And I think that through time, we all kind of change our style and the way that we feel like comfortable presenting ourselves. But there's also, there are different identities where people kind of change from day to day. There's gender fluid, where you can feel more masculine some days and change your presentation, and feel more feminine other days and change your presentation. But then there are also people who are androgynous and always dress a certain way that doesn't seem... So yeah, I think it really depends on the person. And it's hard to get into intricacies of gender with like sweeping generalizations, because everyone is so different. And it, I think only the person can express, how their gender might stay the same or change day to day. But yeah, so I think my answer is it depends.
No, that's fair. That makes a lot of sense. You don't want to dismiss individual differences and just give one sweeping generalization where we put everyone in the same basket.
Yeah, I would say that it often, again, I don't want to make sweeping generalizations, but often people feel the same from day to day. But there are people who fall under certain umbrella categories where it does change, but most people stay pretty firm in their gender identities. Usually.
Interesting. No, that makes total sense. Now, there was a few things that I've written down that I really wanted to make sure that I talk about. Yeah. And I guess maybe this one makes the most sense right now. So one thing that the part where my disconnect kind of came with the education on gender was in this area. A couple of years ago, my understanding was, and you're the perfect guest to have on to kind of help me unravel these thoughts. My understanding was that there was a box that said, if you're a woman, you're doing everything in this box. So you like to cook, you don't wrestle. That's not a feminine thing to do. You know what I mean? Like, it's those stereotypical women activities. And same thing for men. And where my kind of mindset was with that was, we thought that, okay, you know what? We're in a time and place now where a lot of those things are socially constructed. If you're a woman, you don't necessarily have to fall into those roles that you've been given. It's okay if you don't like to cook, and if you're really big into wrestling, and if you're a mechanic, and if you drink beer, right? So my understanding was, I understand you're taking the definition of what it means to be a woman and you're expanding it. Now, in the last couple of years, the part where my own personal question arises from, for example, I'm going to ask you a question, but I think I know what your answer is going to be. Kelly, how many different types of gender identities are there?
Oh my gosh. I I don't know that I can answer that. I feel like it's infinite.
Okay, okay, good. I had a feeling you would say that, and that's fair. But here's my question. I genuinely I'm curious as to, so we realize that a lot of these things are socially constructed, right?
Yeah.
So I thought we can go either one or two ways. Option A, which was the one that I was usually leading towards, where I go, let's take that definition of woman and we expand it, right? She doesn't have to wear pink. She doesn't
Mhm.
have to like dresses. And let's expand what it means to be a woman. But at the end of the day, you would still identify as a woman.
Yeah.
But right, but now we have kind of this other side of it where we go, there's a plethora of gender identities. So
Mhm.
I'm gonna, hopefully I'm not fumbling over my words here, but my confusion stems from this. Instead of saying, well, I identify as, let's say, something else, or I
Mhm.
identify as non-binary, or one of those other genders that I might not have heard of,
Mhm.
why can't, just for the sake of argument, a young woman identify as a woman even though she doesn't agree with all those like preconceived societal notions? Does that kind of make sense? Like,
Yes.
why do you have to be non-binary just because like you don't like wearing dresses and you know you're a mechanic and like, do you kind of see
Yes.
where I'm coming from?
I completely see where you're coming from. And I feel like I have those moments. And I think, Daniel, there's a word for this, and it's called gender abolition. So, meaning that like gender is fake, nothing of that matters.
Uh-huh.
We have made up the idea of gender and what our genders come with. And so, why should we need to prescribe to any of these preconceived ideas of what
Mm,
gender is? Like you said, women wear pink. That was something that was created a long time ago. But before that, pink was seen as a male color. It was strong. It
mm,
was assertive, and blue was soft and feminine. And then things shifted. Like it's all fake. It's all made up.
mm.
Like we make all of these things up, and it completely varies from culture to culture and society to society and time to time. But my thing is that like I wish that gender were abolished. Like I wish that we didn't have gendered sports in schools. I wish that there weren't these preconceived notions of what girls can do and what boys can do and like what jobs you can do based on what's between your legs. Like I think that that's ridiculous. But also, there are some people who feel really strongly about how they would like to be perceived.
Mm,
Like for
mhm,
me, I'm not a trans person, and I don't feel uncomfortable if someone refers to me with a different pronoun. I don't feel uncomfortable if someone groups me in with the word guys or
mhm,
ladies. Like neither of those bother me. But some people feel really strongly one way or the other about um, having their identity recognized. And I think that that's kind of where I come back to, where I'm like, I want gender to be abolished, but also I want people to be able to feel affirmed in their gender and the way that they've come to understand who they are. And when you say, the idea of, you can be a mechanic, you can do whatever you want, no matter what gender you are, I think that that's absolutely true. And that's exactly how we should all view every human. You can do whatever you want. But also, I think that allowing people to self-identify can be really powerful, and often we don't have um, the experience of that unless we have kind of questioned these ideas of gender. Um, and if I can tell a personal story, my partner is non-binary. My partner is trans. So there's this umbrella term of trans, meaning it's different than the gender you were assigned at birth.
mhm.
And a lot of people who are non-binary, who don't identify with male or female, considers themselves trans because they
Oh,
don't identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. But some non-binary people don't consider themselves trans. Again, infinite,
mhm,
infinite possibilities.
for sure.
So my partner and I have really, really different experiences of gender, because when people refer to us with gendered terms like guys or ladies,
Mhm.
it feels like tiny little, needle pricks.
Gotcha.
And by the end of the day, if they've been misgendered, or if they've been grouped in with gendered language, or if someone, assumes something about them based on their appearance, they feel really uncomfortable, and by the end of the day it's exhausting. Whereas me, those things don't hurt me. Like I
Mm,
I don't really care how other people perceive me. I care more about how I feel in my body, which is why I dress differently from day to day. But Cameron, by the end of the day, they, it's it takes away something from them. And so I've kind of had this major shift in the way that I see self-identification, because, you know, I see young students in my school coming in with terminology that I haven't heard of. And I've been an out queer person for a long time. And, you know, they're coming in and saying, you know, I'm a demi boy, or I'm a demi girl, or I'm whatever, all of these terms that I've never heard of before. And I have that moment where I'm like, well, that's just too much. Like, that's too many words. There's too many things out there now. But then I have a moment where it's like, you know, I don't need to get it. I don't need to completely understand every intricacy of you. But if that label helps for you, if that label helps you walk through the world and feel super good about yourself and understand yourself in this new way, then hell yeah, like, do you, you know? So it's definitely a journey. That was a very long-winded response, Danny. I'm so sorry.
First of all, don't apologize, because that was good. Because what I asked was not a simple question, right? It was not a black and white question. It was quite interesting. I'm just trying to like decipher everything that you were saying.
I know there was a lot of information I dumped on you there.
No, because it's good, because it's generally it's a complex topic, because what we first did in the beginning was we differentiated sex and gender. That was important. Otherwise, if we don't, this part doesn't make sense. So it's important that we did that to get to here. I guess, and again, so this is going to be a lot of, is this what you mean? And then you'll say yes, or you'll say, no, Daniel, this is what I actually mean. So I don't put words in your mouth. Good?
No.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And just know that like, this is the kind of thing that I talk about all the time in the line of work that I do. So I will not be offended by anything.
Perfect.
That you ask.
Excellent. Good.
Go ahead.
Good. Awesome. So from my understanding of it is, one reason why there are, like, let's say, a plethora of gender identities, right? And they're infinite, as opposed to someone just, you know, being a girl, but being like a tomboy, let's say, is because they feel they can more strongly identify. I mean, is it just like the label, like being a woman, like gender, it's just been so, what's the word I'm looking for? So societally influenced that they're like, you know what? I don't even want to be labeled under that thing. Like, I don't want you to refer to me as her or she. Like, instead of expanding that term, it's more of, I'll leave that over there, and I would rather identify with this label instead. Is that kind of?
Yeah, totally. And I like the way you said that, like the difference between expanding what it means to be a woman versus acknowledging that there are different versions of who you can be that is separate from woman, right? Like for me, the word tomboy totally felt right for me when I was a kid, and now it doesn't. Like, but also I have these big strong feelings about how our society has defined what it means to be a woman that I hate and that I reject, but I still don't care if someone calls me a woman. Like I feel like that feels right, but I don't like the preconceived notions that come with that in our society. I feel like people have a lot of big bad ideas that they've been taught through you know, socialization, through media and stuff. But I think it's the difference between like expansive gender, meaning like you are expanding what it means to be a boy, or expanding what it means to be a girl, allowing you to be whoever you want to be, versus acknowledging that there's not just boy and there's not just girl. There are, you know, all sorts of ways that you can identify, and all of them are good and don't hurt anyone, and only allow you to feel more like you. Yeah,
that makes sense. That makes sense.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, because I've always thought of, like, you know, if I knew someone who was a girl who was younger but she acted out in these more masculine ways, I wouldn't, like, my first thought wouldn't to be like, oh, like, do you identify as a man? I would probably look at her as being a woman. I'd say, oh, you're just a tomboy. Like, that's okay, right? I shouldn't criticize you for engaging in these quote unquote masculine behaviors. But in my mind, I would still say, but you're still a girl, right? And or so I think.
Yeah, until she tells you otherwise. If she ever,
right. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly right. Yeah, no, and I have those. I often have conversations along those lines with parents who are worried about the way that we are now acknowledging difference in our schools. Like when I went through school, and this wasn't that long ago, I'm not that old, but when I went through school, I never had any sort of representation of queer people or trans people or anything like that. I never had expansive ideas of gender. It was, you know, girls did this and boys do that. And it wasn't necessarily explicit. It wasn't my teacher saying, you know, if you're a girl, you have to do these things. But, you know, it was implicit. It was shown in the stories that we read and the history that we learned and the movies that we watched. And so I didn't have any sort of representation that there were other options, right? And I think about this more for me in terms of my sexuality, which is separate from gender. And we can talk about that if you like. But when I think about the way that I went through school, I didn't know that gay people existed. Like, it was small town, early 2000s. The only like gay representation I had was effeminate men who got beat up because they were gay. And then I grew up and I moved out of my small town and I met a lot of people and I was like, oh, wait, there's something else here. Like, there are other options here, you know? And being able to recognize that A, that was a possibility, and B, there was a word for it, was huge for me. And I can see that in terms of parents being worried that if their kids see trans people in school, if they see that that's a narrative that we're teaching, like, not in terms of like, you know, you have to be trans, but here's a story about a trans kid. That's totally normal. Let's move on and talk about science. I think that a lot of parents worry that we are telling their kids to be trans. We're telling kids that, you know, if you're a girl and you like boyish things, maybe you're a boy. But really, all we're doing is that idea of expansion, right? Expanding your idea of what and who you can be, and representation. And like, seeing trans people in stories or seeing queer people in stories doesn't make you queer or trans. It just allows you to see that that is also a reality. That is also real and good and true and fine. And if that's you, then here you are represented, here you are loved and accepted in these stories and in your schools. And if that's you, then welcome, you know? It's allowing kids to see themselves represented in their schooling, and allowing them to, you know, not struggle like so many of us did, and discover themselves earlier than they had been able to in the past, you know?
I know, I definitely understand where you're coming from. There's a couple of gems that you dropped in there that I really want to touch on. So the first one is that this is coming from a place of love. This is coming from a place of caring. This is coming from a place of, hey, you know, I didn't have too many people who I felt like represented me growing up. So if you're, you know, like a kid who's like in that certain area, you want them to have quote unquote like role models of sorts. Like, oh, there are other people who might think differently. It's not just the binary. There are other people that also look like me and feel like me and act the way that I might want to do in the future, if they even know that it exists, right? So there's definitely that part. Another thing I'm very happy that you brought up was the worry of parents, because one thing that I've heard, and you're right, it's that idea of, if we start teaching young kids about other forms of sexuality, so being homosexual, trans, you name it, there is that worry of, you know, how is that going to impact my kid and what are they learning? And I think it really stems from this idea of, you would agree with me, Kelly, in saying that young kids are pretty impressionable.
Yeah.
And their, I guess their logic, their thinking behind it is going, you know, if you have a 6, 7, 8-year-old kid, it's not very hard to convince them of something. So the worry is, what if this kid goes to school and the teacher, as she's representing, she says, well, there's other things out there. You can be non-binary, binary, a male can like a male, a female can like a female. And what if, I don't know how to go about this, but what if some of the questions that were posed kind of look like, well, Timmy, you know, do you feel like a girl? And 6, 7-year-old Timmy, he's not really sure. Like this is another question I want to talk about. Like, at what age do you discover that level of self-awareness where you realize kind of who you are and what you feel comfortable doing and not doing? So my concern is, like, when we tell little Timmy, if he's 6 years old, and saying, Timmy, do you feel like a girl? And whether he says yes or no, and says, how can we
ensure that we're not swaying them one way or the other?
Yeah, because like, and not just with gender, I mean with anything, right? You sit a child down, you say, are you sure, you know, this didn't happen, or are you sure you didn't see, you know, you could really sway someone one way or another. And when you're a child, this actually leads to my next question is, at what point would you say, because so what we'd call me in this sort of a dialogue, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, would be a cisgendered male, right? Would be like, my sex is the same as my gender. Like cool. So in that sense, I've never had to think about, or like, not like directly anyways, like, oh, am I attracted to, you know what I mean? Like, it's just is a thing. at what age, if there is an age even, and there probably isn't, would you say, Kelly, that you say, okay, at this point, the kid has got some wherewithal about himself, like to know himself well, to know if like, is it a phase? Is it,
Mm,
I just like playing with Barbie dolls and that's cool, but I'm still a boy,
mhm,
as opposed to I'm not comfortable in the body that I am or in the
mhm.
way that I'm perceived, which is something else. What do
Yeah.
you think about that?
That's a huge question. That's really good. And I've recently read, and I completely forgot the name of the study, but there's a study that was done that shows that most children have a sense of their gender by the age of 4.
Whoa.
Like 4 to 7
Hmm.
is the age that they have a sense of like internally, how do they feel? But the problem is that they don't usually have the words for it, right? When you're that
Hmm.
young, you, like you said, you're very impressionable. You have ideas of what girls and what boys do. Like by that time, a lot of children, if they're in Western society, can express like, well, boys are doctors and girls are nurses, and girls are mommies, boys are daddies, etc. Like there are these roles that we have an idea of, but there's that difference between what we see in other people and what we see in the world versus what we feel in ourselves, right? The
Hmm.
idea of other people's expressions versus our own identities.
Yep.
But yeah, like you said, it's just that you can't necessarily express it when you're that young. You can't
Mm.
necessarily express it. But there's been all of these studies that show that a lot of trans people, like I was saying earlier, if you don't have that representation, you're probably not going to know. You're just going to think either that you're gay or
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
there's something wrong. I don't know, maybe maybe you're anxious, maybe you're socially anxious, or maybe you have depression or whatever. You just don't have the language for it unless you've had that kind of representation. But a lot of trans people knew by the time they were like maximum 7, they knew that they
Mm.
were the gender that they are now living in. So not the gender that they were assigned at birth. And when I'm thinking back to like my experiences as a kid, I don't know that I could have expressed one way or the other that I was a tomboy. I just know that I like to wear backwards hats and I played basketball with the boys, like I had experiences of what I liked, but I didn't know that that meant something about my gender. And you probably wouldn't either. When you're that
Mhm,
young, you probably
mhm,
don't
mhm.
know that the things that you like or what you like to put on your body or whatever reflects your gender. And I'm thinking now about also my nephew, my cousin's kid, who loves to build with blocks and is obsessed with trucks, but he loves to wear his sister's Elsa dress and her like figure skating dress.
Mhm.
And those two things don't really block themselves out. And obviously we don't really talk to him about gender. He knows that my partner uses a different name and pronouns than when he first met them. But like, we never talk to him and ask like, hey, Henry, you really love wearing dresses. Does that mean that you're a girl? Because it just doesn't really
Mm.
matter. It doesn't matter at that point. He's 4 years old, he's just having a
I
good time. He's
completely
doing
agree.
him. Yeah. And I think that that's the same thing in school. Like, unless it's something that a kid is bringing forth for themselves and being like, hey, this is really feeling bad. I need to not wear these clothes, or I need you to call me a different name. Like, unless it's coming from them, there's not, I don't know a single teacher, and granted, I'm not an elementary school teacher, but like, I don't know a single teacher who would go up to a kid and be like, hey, Timmy, like, I see that you like playing with Barbie dolls. Do you think maybe you're a girl? Like,
Mm.
I don't think that that's a conversation. No, I'm not going to say I don't think. That's
I
not a
hope you're right.
conversation.
Good.
Yeah,
I hope
that's
you're
not a
right.
conversation that would happen in school.
I'm glad
But
we agree.
yeah, but I think the difference is that there is now the ability and the imperative to have those conversations to widen our ideas, expand our ideas of gender, to make that whole mirror thing. So this is what we talk about in education: is that the things that you learn should be a mirror and a window. A mirror where you get to see yourself reflected and know that your life and your family and your identity are things that happen in the world, and a window in that you get to see into other people's experiences and other people's identities and know that those are real and good and valid and happen in the world. So it's that you have an understanding of yourself and your place in the world, and you have an understanding of other people and their differences and their place in the world, and that all of those are good and right, and you can go back to having your snack. uh,
That's good. That's really
yeah.
good. Oh,
Yeah,
that's so interesting. That was really well explained. That was really well explained.
thanks. I don't even remember what the question was anymore.
That's all right.
I feel
It
like
doesn't
I
matter.
rambled enough.
No. The question doesn't matter. I think the real beauty of it is, you know, we should put it out there. It should be represented. People should know that it exists. But there's a
Yeah.
difference between that and cramming it down a kid's throat. You know, you
Yes.
sit down. Oh, you're playing with Barbie dolls, so you must be a girl. And so, you know,
Yeah,
so I
exactly.
completely agree with you in that sense.
Yeah.
Because if I was to say hypothetically, like if I had a son, if he was 5, 6 years old, and
Mhm.
if he like just like to wear dresses, so what? Like you're a kid.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I'm sure if I was a kid, maybe I played with Barbie dolls. Maybe I like to
Yeah.
cook with my mom. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't mean necessarily
Yeah.
that you identify as something else. Like you're still a boy, you're still a girl. But I think, like you
Mhm.
said yourself, when that individual then approaches you and they say, you know, I really don't feel comfortable, and then so I guess the kind of
Mhm.
gray area is, you know, at what age do they approach you and they go, hey, this is how I feel. Like when they're more
Mm.
able to express themselves. At what point as a parent do you go in? I don't know how this is going to come across, but at what point do you go, I believe you and let's do something
Mm.
about it? As
Yeah.
opposed to you just go, yeah. And then you're thinking, I'll give it 6 months and then we'll
Yeah.
kind of see how we're feeling then.
Yeah. And that's a really good point as well, because I think that a lot of parents and adults often worry about that. Like, well, what if it is a phase? And the thing that I often say to parents is like, yeah, it might be. I don't know your kid. I don't know their experience. But wouldn't you rather that they know that they can come to you with anything and that you're a
Mm.
safe person and that you're going to support them no matter what, and you're going to follow through on their wishes and what will make them comfortable? And then if, you know, 6 months or 2 years down the line, they're like, actually, I don't know if that's real. If I don't know if that fits me anymore. You're like, okay, cool. You know, like it
Mm.
doesn't have to be a be all end all, especially because when kids are that age, like under the age of, I don't know, 13, all you're going to do is like put them in different clothes or refer to them differently. Like it's not going to be a life-changing, drastic
Mm.
movement that you have to make in order to make that kid feel safe and supported. Like there's a difference between there's these two things that you would usually talk about in terms of trans identities is social transition and medical transition. So
Mhm.
social transition is having someone call you by your name and pronouns that you have chosen, using the bathroom that you feel comfortable in, wearing clothes that you feel comfortable in. That's a social transition. It's how other people refer to you and see you and how you present to people. And then there's a medical transition, which is, you know, in the teenage years is puberty blockers. And that isn't taken upon lightly. You know, it's not something that
I
a
was
kid
just
can
going to
be
bring
like,
that up actually.
yeah. It's not something that a kid can just be like, yeah, I feel like I'm a girl. Okay, let's stop your puberty right now, immediately. Like it's a process, and it's not taken upon lightly. I don't know any doctor who would just like up and give a kid puberty blockers, but also the idea that they're irreversible is untrue. Like if a kid goes off puberty blockers, they'll just have their puberty. Like it just goes back to normal. It just lets your body do the thing that it would have biologically done had you not taken puberty blockers. And then the other thing is hormone replacement therapy. So if you were assigned female at birth, your body would normally start producing estrogen when you're around 13. But if you went on puberty blockers, your body would not produce estrogen. It would just kind of hang out in prepubescence for a while. If you started taking hormone replacement therapy, it's where you give that person testosterone, and then that would start to put them through, a typically male puberty. So they would start to have secondary sex characteristics of boys instead of girls, more facial hair, different body fat distribution. But those things are all there are some things that are not reversible. Like if you start taking testosterone, you start growing facial hair, you will continue to have facial hair. But if you stop taking testosterone and you stop your puberty blockers, you will go back to having the puberty of a girl. Like I had to do some research on this because I had a conversation with a teacher where he was like very unhappy. He was very unhappy with me for talking about
Gotcha.
gender and sexuality, and he thought that trans people were a menace, basically. So we had this like big conversation that was pretty tough because there was a ruling in London that made it, I think, like illegal for teenagers to go on puberty blockers or something like that.
Interesting.
And my experience of that is that there are other hormonal drugs that female teenagers, at least, are put on that can be far more damaging than puberty blockers or than hormone replacement therapy. Like my doctor had suggested that I go on the pill when I was a teenager. And that, you know, floods your body with hormones, and it can give you major side effects. It can increase your risk of cancer. It can give you, you know, a stroke. Like there are all sorts of side effects to the pill, but that's something that we put teenagers on all the time. And there's not this outcry in the same way as hormone replacement therapy is. And I find that really interesting. And I won't get into the gender politics of it and how, you know, female bodies are policed in a different way. But I think that what it really comes down to is that people fear what they don't understand. And a lot of times we just don't really understand the process of what it means to transition, either medically or socially. Usually more medically. I feel like socially is kind of understandable, but we don't understand the intricacies of what medical transition looks like. And so it's big and scary, and we don't want it to happen to our kids, which is understandable. Like you think about any sort of medical changes for a child, it can be intimidating. But if it's a child under 13, there's not going to be any medical changes. Like if a kid who comes to you and they're 6 years old and they say, hey, I don't really feel like a boy, can you call me Kelly? You're like, yeah, sure. I don't know. That's all you need. Put on a dress if you want. Do what you want. You know, it's just it's a very different process. And yeah, going back to that idea of it being a phase, like it might be, but a phase that doesn't necessarily harm them or anybody else if it does come down to it.
I really like your, oh, sorry, did I interrupt you?
No, that's it.
I was going to say, I really like your open-mindedness. I like how you present your side of your perspective. And then you go, well, on the other side, I understand why someone would say X, because, so I think that's really, really good. Clearly you've been doing this for quite some time. I'm trying to be like, man, how many times has Kelly had to answer these same questions over and over again?
No, but it's good. That's why I do it, you know, like I think back to my schooling and how very different my life would have been if I had had someone who did this kind of work, if there was any kind of mention about expansive gender and sexuality ideas. And, you know, I think my life would have been really different. It would have been a lot easier if I had.
Only imagine.
Yeah. And I also think, like, you know, I went through school seeing only straight people and only cisgender people. And yet here I am engaged to my partner who is trans and non-binary. I identify as queer. There's nothing in my schooling that, you know, made me this way. There's nothing that I saw in media that made me this way. If it were true that only seeing gay people made you
just
gay,
gonna say that
a lot more people would be gay because there's a lot more people in gay media than there is. And if it were true, then I would be straight.
Then you'd be straight, yeah, exactly.
And I am not. So yeah, it's I think that it's understandable to see this as some sort of trend, as some sort of wave of people questioning their gender, questioning their sexuality. But really, I think that the main changes are that it's way safer and more acceptable than it's ever been to be queer or to be trans. Like, we are in a world that is far more understanding of different identities. And so it makes it easier for people to come out, but also there's far more representation than there ever had been. Like, I would have come out as a teenager if I knew that it were an option, but I just thought that I had really intense friendships with my female friends. Like, it would have been very, very different if I had had this other understanding. So I think that rather than seeing this as some sort of wave or trend of people being queer or trans, I think it's just that we see it as a possibility, as a safe possibility. We know that this is a thing that can happen. So it's something that we can, you know, can experience for ourselves. Yeah.
I would definitely agree with that statement. I think, you know, one of the unfortunate things that people can't think of as like a trend. Oh, it's fun to be gay now. It's fun to be queer. You know what I mean? Like a haircut, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's doing it.
Yeah.
As if you can just flip the switch on and off.
Yeah. And like, if that were true, it would be a lot easier for me to be straight. I would choose to be like, I mean, I love my partner. I wouldn't choose to be straight.
No, but
like,
I get you. You could.
The world would be a lot easier for me if I were straight.
Of course. No,
so,
I see where you're coming from.
Yeah. If we could choose,
yeah,
I'm sure that a lot of people would choose the path that's easier, the path that doesn't involve as much violence or as much discord or as many questions, you know, but and that's not how it works.
Of course.
Yeah.
But like you were saying yourself, Kelly, I think that we're, especially speaking on the West, and particular places, but like here, like California, where people are really open-minded and it's a safe space, and because of that, people feel comfortable opening up. They know that they're not going to get, you know, harassed or bullied or beat up because of how they feel or what they do. Just going back to Kelly, what we were saying earlier, and I feel like a lot of people share the view that I have whenever it comes to, for example, you know, we gave that example about, you know, 6-year-old boy, you know, playing with a dress, right? Whatever, right? Okay, so 6 months later, you don't like the dress. There's no repercussions. There's no consequences. Personally, I know very, very little about puberty blockers. So I have and you were saying that, hopefully I'm not misquoting, like uncertainty breeds fear, something along that line.
Yeah.
Right. So me not knowing, so you said that it is reversible. I was not aware of this. I'll definitely look into this after this conversation. I think that I speak for a lot of people when the only kind of sign of caution is when you are going in there with those puberty blockers, and if it is a phase, the worry is, you know, what are the long-term repercussions, and how much of an impact will it have on this person? So I think when we talk about, you know, a young boy helping his mother cook, or a young girl like wrestling with her siblings, you know, there's really no repercussions to that. Like in a bad, you know, whatever. So I can call you by a different name. That's fine, right? I can just call you by your original name again. But when we get to puberty blockers, and again, because I don't know enough about them to make a stance on it's either this or it's either this. If they're reversible, that makes me very happy for someone who might go in there and go, you know what, it's not for me. But I think for a lot of people who either they don't know enough about it, or maybe they've seen things that say that they're largely not reversible, I can 100% sympathize with them and going, you know, if we go down this road and we start interfering with your natural biology, I am worried for this child's if he or she ends up having a difference of opinion in their later years. And this might be super inappropriate to compare these two. Kelly, when I was 12, I wanted to be a WWE wrestler. I don't know if you watched WWE. You got like John Cena, and then before then you had like the Stone Colds, the Rocks, the Macho Man, Randy Savage, right? For about a year, I was set. I was looking at YouTube. I was looking at how to body slam, right? I was using my pillow. I was like, I'm gonna be a WWE wrestler, right? And like, let's imagine there was this kind of thing. I know it's kind of like steroids, but it's not, that you can inject me with, right? And they would enlarge my chest and my arms, like John Cena. I don't know if you've seen him. He's like 50 and he's jacked. So it could like jack me up, make me big and strong or whatever. This is a very poor example. I realize it, but I'm too far in.
I'm ready.
Good. I'm too far in, so I might as well keep going, right? So anyways, I'm big and I'm 250, right? I don't have a neck. And I'm like, this is amazing. Yeah, thank you, Dad. I'm going to be a pro wrestler, right? I turned 24 and I'm like, you know what, man? I don't want to be a pro wrestler anymore. Like, I just want to be a chess player, right? Now, I'm not, that's not right, because typically like it's good for a man. Okay, yeah, perfect. Yes. You know what you mean. So my thing is, if it's reversible, great. Just so the option's there in case anyone wants it. But again, I think a huge worry for people, including myself, who are uneducated on the matter and actually should be educated on the matter, because it's a very important thing. You know, is it reversible? And if it is, and just what are some of like the side effects of that sort of treatment? What are some of the implications? Like what are the chances that something goes wrong, right? Is the technology all right? Is it safe? Is it a proven procedure? You know, what is the survivor? Just so a bunch of those things. And I don't think that's just blasting. Like, I'm not saying that puberty blockers shouldn't be done, but I'm saying everybody should take responsibility to go educate themselves on the matter. When it's done, when it's not appropriate, is it reversible? What are the chances? You know what I mean? How do individual differences change? I don't want it to be in the sense of, we say that it's reversible. Someone, let's say, takes puberty blockers, and then for whatever reason, talk allergic reaction or some sort of wild genetic component, that it won't be reversible for that person. Do you know what I mean? Absolutely. So I think as long as we just kind of tell everyone to do their own research and look into it and be careful, be open to learning, I think that sounds like a very reasonable way to approach it. Would you agree?
Yeah, I totally would. And and I think that that's a really good point, like acknowledging that. I mean, I don't want to make it seem as though I am like the expert on puberty blockers or on hormone replacement therapy, but from the research that I have done, and the research that I've done has been through TransCare BC, which is the like entity that takes care of trans healthcare in British Columbia. All of the information that they have and that they have studied is that I won't give you a percentage, but like puberty blockers just prevent your body from producing the level of hormones that it would take for you to undergo puberty. It doesn't replace those hormones with anything. It just kind of stops that biological process until you decide to go one way or the other. So a young student in high school who wants to medically transition likely will not be taking hormone replacement therapy. They would just be going on puberty blockers. So it's just putting their body on pause, like Frozen Disney style. You were not moving forward in your growth in your body. You were just kind of staying in pubescence. And that's it. And that is the thing that is reversible, as far as I understand, entirely reversible. Because if you stop taking them, then it just allows your body to restart the process of puberty.
Now, sorry to interrupt, Kelly. So if you take them, you just put them on pause, right?
Yes.
You're not necessarily changing anything. You're just
Nope.
putting it on hold.
Yeah.
So when someone like stops doing it and goes unpause, does it speed up to make up for lost time, or does it just go at the same regular rate? Like, do you know anything about that?
That's a really good question. I don't know that.
I appreciate your honesty.
I would assume that it would go at the same rate, but I have no idea. But I do know that it will just restart. And I think that, from my understanding, from what I have read, the only thing that would change your like the chemical makeup of your body, or like the biological process of your body, like if you're worried about not being able to have children in the future, or like the makeup of your body, the only thing that would have that effect is the hormone replacement therapy. So that's where you would have the quote unquote opposite hormones put in your body than the ones that your body would normally produce. So if you were assigned female at birth, you would then take testosterone. If you were assigned male at birth, you would then take estrogen. And that's where you get into those some changes that are irreversible. There are some that are reversible, but a lot of them aren't. And that's where you get into that point where you wouldn't be giving a 13-year-old hormone replacement therapy. You would be waiting until they are at the age of consent to allow them to make that decision for themselves, because just like any other major medical decision, it would be in the hands of their parents until they're of the age of consent, right? And I don't have an opinion one way or the other. I think that people should be allowed to do what they want with their bodies. And I think that parents are allowed to be worried and concerned and hesitant to allow their children to do things. I'm not a parent, so I can't really speak to the fear that you would have around, major changes. But I think that you would have those fears about any medical change, about any major decision that your child has about their body. I remember my mom freaking out about a haircut I got. So I can't imagine if I came to her wanting to do something major with my body. But there is a difference between, not wanting that for your own self or for your own child, and making it so that other people can't do that for themselves. Like the legislation versus the personal decision. And like I said, as far as I know, the only time that a child would start taking hormone replacement therapy is when they come to the age of consent and they can actually make that decision for themselves, because that's where you get into those irreversible changes.
That's brilliant. I learned quite a lot. That was actually really, really informational. Like the separation of, so you have puberty blockers and hormone
replacement therapy.
Hormone replacement therapy. And you're saying hormone replacement therapy, wait till the age of consent.
Yeah.
But puberty blockers, you could start earlier, in your opinion?
Yes.
Gotcha.
And again, I don't want to say this as though, that I'm like a hormone scientist or something where, I would be able to speak to this. But from what I've read, and like my partner has gone through hormone replacement therapy. Obviously, they've passed the age of puberty. Right. But like Cameron is on testosterone. Cameron had top surgery. Like there are all of these, I've seen these processes and how they work. And it's a lot of hoops to jump through. Like there's a lot that they had to do to get to this point. So I don't want it to come across as though, I'm a master and, genius around all of this information.
I respect your honesty.
But also I don't want it to seem as though this is like a flippant decision that anyone can make about their own body. Like it is a long process. It's a lot of work. It's not something that would ever be undertaken lightly by anyone of any age.
Definitely. It sounds like a huge decision. And I think we both agree on the fact that if that is something that a lane that you want to pursue, you should absolutely do your research and education. And we also both agree that the message here shouldn't be to make those things illegal. And the message also shouldn't be to say everybody should take them if you feel that. So we can definitely agree on that. Perfect. Excellent. Excellent. Was there something else you wanted to add on that particular discussion, Kelly? Because I had another question that was going to take it a little bit away. from the
Yeah,
puberty
go for your
blockers and
question.
stuff.
I'm ready.
Perfect. So earlier, Kelly, you dropped the word of gender fluidity, and
Yeah.
that's another one that I can't quite understand. So again, we have the perfect guest on. So if you don't mind just giving me a definition of, so again, earlier we talked about gender identity and gender expression. Now, in relation to those, what is gender fluidity?
So I think that that one can be both identity and expression, because it
Mhm.
can be the way that you're feeling. Actually, I haven't actually talked to a lot of people about this, but I feel gender fluid. When I was saying earlier that I dress more masculine some
Mhm,
days and
mhm,
more
mhm.
feminine other days. I've kind of come to the realization that it is to the point where I cannot wear a dress on some days. It makes me feel super uncomfy.
Hmm.
And like some days where I've only told my queer friends this, but Daniel, some days when I try to wear makeup and I put on lipstick, I feel like I'm a drag queen. Like I feel like I'm in drag. It
Whoa,
feels really,
no way.
and
Hmm.
it's really strange to try and express, because like I don't talk to a lot of people about it, because I feel like it's not something that bothers me in terms of the way that other people perceive me. So it's not necessarily about um it's not necessarily about my identity that I need people to understand, or
Mhm.
that I need people to respect and to treat me differently or refer to me differently. It's more for me in terms of the way that I identify, and the way that I dress myself and the way that I present myself. So it doesn't feel like something that I need validation for from other people. It's just that some days I feel more masculine and some days I feel more feminine. And I think that for me, it's both. Yeah, it's both. It's identity and expression. I can't wear dresses some days. Today I could not wear a
Interesting.
dress.
Interesting. Okay, now
Yeah,
to follow up on that, Kelly,
yeah.
I'm going to give you. Okay, I'm going to sound so ridiculous when I say this,
No, no, never.
but just wait until you hear what I have to say.
Okay.
Just hold that thought. Do you have tequila nearby? I'm joking. I'm joking. No. Like, okay, so here's my understanding of what you said, but like gender fluid in a general sense.
Mhm.
And as soon as I say it, you're gonna be like, this kid doesn't know what the heck he's talking about.
Nope.
So this is my understanding of it, right? And if this sounds condescending or sarcastic, I don't mean it to come off that
No,
way.
no, I'm never offended. Don't worry. Go ahead.
Excellent. So I wake up in the morning. Okay, I just want you to imagine
Yes.
this image.
Yeah, yeah.
Young Daniel wakes up. He goes about his day. He goes onto YouTube and he watches a couple of boxing fights.
Mhm.
And these boxing fights make him feel masculine. He feels good. He feels this dominance and this aggression. He's like, yes, that's awesome. Forcibly put your will on someone else. This is amazing, right?
Yeah.
And then later on in the day, I'm on Netflix. I see this movie, happens to be a romantic comedy. I'm like, let's put it on. 30 minutes in, I am weeping. I am weeping like a child, right?
Mhm.
Tissues and snot and everything's coming
Yeah.
down. Could you make an argument and say, well, Daniel, seeing as you displayed more masculine behavior in the afternoon
Mhm.
and then more quote unquote feminine behavior in the evening, you're gender fluid?
Well, I'm gonna turn it back to you. Would you feel feminine in those moments when you feel emotions? Does it make you feel feminine or girl-like?
Not at all.
There
Because
you
my
go.
my perspective is that like you don't have to be a girl to cry. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Well, and that's the thing for me, is that I don't necessarily feel like my behavior changes or that my personality changes throughout the day or from day to day.
Mhm, mhm.
It's more in terms of my expression, the clothes that I wear, the way that I do my hair, whether I do my makeup,
Mm.
that kind of thing. It's not necessarily my personality or the things that I enjoy doing or the feelings that I'm having. It's not that, when I feel tender or loving, that I feel more feminine, or that when I feel pissed off, I feel more masculine. I'm all of those things. I'm always pissed off. I'm always tender. Like
Mhm.
I can always have that range of emotions and expressions and experiences of the world, but it's more internal. It's more internal in the way that I feel in my body and the way that I want to present my body. So it's not that, like, to put it back to your example, it's not that you would then, feel like you need to present yourself differently because you're feeling
Mm.
emotional in your movie. You don't need to, you're not going to maybe walk differently after you've watched that movie than after you engaged in some wrestling. I find that it's more, I don't know. Again, it's more personal, and I can't speak to every gender fluid person. I think that some gender fluid people genuinely feel more like a boy on some days and more like a girl on some days. And for me, that's not how I don't ever feel like I'm a boy. I just sometimes feel more masculine, you know? I think that it's so unique to each person. And I don't want to make generalizations again, because I can only speak to my own experience. But yeah, I feel like it's more in terms of the way that I see myself and the way that I want to present myself, rather than the way that I experience the world, if that makes sense.
That does. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
With respects to how you express yourself. So like you said, if I watch that movie and I, start to walk a different way, or I decided, okay, I want to put on a dress now because of that.
Yeah. I don't think it's necessarily influenced by my external world, like for you, I think that, not for you, for people, I think that the fashion that we're into can be influenced by the external world. Like if you see something in a show and you're like, oh, I love that outfit, I want to wear that. Or interests, maybe you watched a movie about wrestling, you're like, oh yeah, I want to be a wrestler or whatever. I think that those kinds of things can be influenced, but it's not necessarily that it will then influence who you are. It will then influence how you want to how you see yourself. I think that I'm not doing a good job of separating that out, but
that's okay. That's okay. The place that I was coming from, and I apologize to interrupt your thought there. It was like, whenever I heard of gender fluidity, so we know, for example, that just a person's personality, right, and your identity, it changes over time. We used to think, at the age of 30, that's it. That's not necessarily true. We can't say that your personality is more stable in the later years of your life,
totally,
like 15, 70, as opposed to 10 and 30. But your personality is always changing, right? I might like playing guitar now, but then maybe a year from now or 6 months, I don't like music anymore, but I like blank, or maybe my idea on a certain thing's shifted. So my thought was always like, what was the difference between like a person being gender fluid and a person just naturally like having changes in their personality? But if I'm understanding you correctly, it's more about the self-expression, or like how you present yourself. But see, even that's tough, Kelly.
That's tough, because how can you separate that from style?
Exactly,
right?
Exactly.
It's hard to separate that from style. I know, and I feel like I'm not doing a good job at explaining it, because I haven't really explained it to people before, other than like other queer friends who are just like, I don't know, dude, you do you. Like, it's not really like something that I've had to parse out. And when I'm thinking about it, I also have a hard time separating it from just your style and how you grow and change from day to day or from year to year. But I think that when it comes down to like the difference between a shift in style and gender fluidity, I think that it comes down to that level of like discomfort. When years ago, if you were a trans person, you had to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria. Like in order to move forward and like get surgery or get hormones or whatever, you had to be diagnosed with what they call gender dysphoria, where you felt physically uncomfortable in your body. You felt like it didn't match who you were, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like sometimes that's the way that I kind of ground the ideas of gender in, because that's no longer a prerequisite to have any sort of medical changes as a trans person. You no longer have to be diagnosed. But I think that when it comes into those ideas of gender and identity, I think that the way that I separate that out from style and personality is the level of discomfort you might have in dressing a certain way or in being perceived in a certain way, like I don't know about you, but when you're young and you have to go to like a family function or like something fancy, and you have to wear like that itchy wool suit and those tight like patent leather shoes, or like for me the frilly dress, and it's just like uncomfortable and you can't wait to get home and rip that thing off. That's what I think about when I think about gender identity. Like, is it going to make you a level of uncomfortable that you cannot bear to be perceived in a certain way, or to dress in a certain way, or to see your own self in a certain way? Like, I think that a lot of cisgender people never have to confront those ideas, like you're like, I don't know, call me any pronoun, I don't care, or I wouldn't care if you called me a girl or whatever. And maybe that's true. Like maybe if I constantly referred to you by a different name, if I always called you Kevin because I think you look more like a Kevin, or if I always referred to you as a girl because you said you didn't care, maybe that wouldn't bother you. But I think that when it comes down to gender identity,
it'd bother me.
But like a lot of people,
Daniel.
I know, exactly, right? It's kind of a level of
Yeah.
disrespect. Like,
No,
oh, you feel like a
100%. I
student.
agree with
Yeah. But like if it a lot of people will assert that, like, no, that wouldn't bother me. I don't care. So
you.
why does gender matter to you? Right? That's often the argument that I hear,
That's it.
like, well, no, you can call me anything. I don't care. Refer to me however you want. And I think that if it came down to it, if you were actually referred to that way, or if you actually had to dress a certain way that someone prescribed for you all the time, you would probably feel a level of discomfort. And for me, that's where it comes down to in terms of that presentation aspect, that identity aspect is the, will it physically pain you to do things a different way, you know? And some days it does. Some days I don't experience comfort if I dress a certain way. It's weird. It's very weird.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I appreciate your honesty. Thank you. That's
Yeah.
you definitely didn't have to open up, but I feel like you doing it really helps to get the points across with the examples. So I think it's
Yeah. Well, and
easy to understand.
I think that not my problem, but like the issue that I have often in talking about these kinds of ideas is that I worry that people will think that if I open up about my own experience or about my partner or about whatever, that then they cannot then ask me questions, or that because I've shared my experience, then they can't question it, or they can't, have any whatabouts or what ifs, or feel as though I'm no longer a person that they can, ask their actual questions of, because they worry about offending me. But I'm not very easily offended when someone is trying to actually learn, It's more when someone has got their mind made up already and thinks that I don't know. When I was in Kelowna, Daniel, I had parents calling the school to complain that I was teaching their children that it was inappropriate for a queer adult to be around children, or that it was inappropriate for me to talk about my partner in the way that my colleagues talked about their wives and husbands. And that's when I have big feelings about it, like when it's demonizing a person for just existing. But when people are having these genuine conversations and asking these great questions and trying to understand, I love it. It brings me a lot of joy. So I really appreciate you being an amazing host, and B,
Thank you.
always learning. This is why I'm a teacher. I love teaching people. That's my joy. That's why I do it. Yeah.
That's awesome, Kelly. I'm really happy to hear. I couldn't agree with you more. I think that unfortunately a lot of these things they don't go well because they go into it with not let's see what can I learn today? What new perspective can I adopt? Maybe Kelly will say something that I've never thought about. Maybe I'll say something that Kelly's never thought about. And when you go into it with a very open-minded and humble approach, it's very different than that kind of argumentative, I've already made up my mind, I'm here to score points in a debate manner. And I think you see that with all sorts of subjects, right? You pick, you name it. And there's always people who feel strongly about one thing or another. So I can definitely understand why, unfortunately, Kelly, just people looking at you, they're going to make assumptions about you. And you might be the sweetest, kindest person. And then when they talk, if they already have their preconceived notions of what they think is right or wrong, and you're this like horrible person because you're trying to educate people on these matters because there's one poor kid in the back of the class feels like they have no one representing them, but that's you. You're standing up, but then on the other side, you might look at people like myself who are not a part of the LGBT community, who, if you think that I have preconceived notions about you, well, now that's going to impact the way that you interact with me.
Totally.
If you thought you were going to come on this podcast and I was just going to insult you and disrespect you and speak badly, well, that would impact how you would answer the questions. That would impact you like interrupting me before even, you know what I mean? So all of a sudden, I might have a misunderstanding about yourself. You might have a misunderstanding about me. And because of these things that don't even exist, that's how friendships get ruined. Isn't that nuts?
Yeah. And that's how you learn nothing and you never grow as a person. Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for being a wonderful question asker and letting me ramble as I tend to do,
It was awesome. No, really, thank you for coming on, because I think it takes a different level of courage to not only, to speak to someone one-on-one, but also to be okay with other people listening and hearing. And some people, the people who listen, they're either going to have like a lot of knowledge in gender, but I don't think they'll have more than you. But No, seriously. Actually, I don't know. I shouldn't say that. But a lot of people are just really at that bare bone minimum where the things that we talked about, gender expression, gender identity, gender fluid personality, puberty blockers, like this is all new to a lot of people. Like
Yeah.
a few of these things, they were completely new to me, the way that you construed them. So I think it was really good to hear. I really appreciate you coming on. Kelly, anything that we talked about with respects to gender, is there something that I left out? Is there another maybe big misconception or something that you just think is really important to get out there that we have not talked about?
I don't think so, but the thing I actually wanted to like end on something which is something that I often share with teachers and colleagues alike is you don't have to understand every in and out of gender or sexuality or the LGBTQ community. You don't have to understand everything to still show respect to people and their identities. You don't have to totally get it or even totally accept it, but the bare minimum that you have to do is show respect. And also, you don't have to know everything to be a good ally. Like you don't have to completely get, like I don't completely get everything, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't still be like an excellent ally and a safe person for a typically vulnerable community. Yeah.
I'm glad you said that, Kelly. So people don't think it's either one or the other. Either you got to be an active feminist out there, or you're against us. So I'm glad you said that. Good.
Yeah.
Good. Excellent. Kelly, for anyone listening who wants to maybe educate themselves more on gender, who wants to, it could be anything, YouTube videos, certain people to follow, other people with podcasts who really focus on these ideas. Are there some things that you'd recommend or certain pages, even like Instagram accounts that you'd say, yeah, this is awesome?
Yeah, there is. Okay. So, if you wanted to learn more about what is involved in like medical or social transition in terms of like trans healthcare. So it's Trans Care BC is the site, and I think it's .ca or something, but Trans Care BC. And then in terms of people to follow, I love this person called Jeffrey Marsh on Instagram. They're a non-binary adult who does these like beautiful videos that are so uplifting and so educational and wonderful. So it's the Jeffrey Marsh on Instagram. They're wonderful. And there are so many others that I feel like if you even just Google, queer Instagrammers to follow, but I follow so many that I can't now parse them out. I just always think of Jeffrey Marsh because it comes from such a, it's educational, but it's also so tender and like accessible and positive that I feel like that's a really great place to start. And it's a great place to kind of challenge yourself if you are uncomfortable with different expressions of gender. I think they're a really wonderful person to start. Yeah.
Awesome. Kelly, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, so have I. Thank you so much for hosting.
Of course. Ladies and gentlemen, that's been another episode. I hope you enjoyed and stay safe.